We're here talking about the environment and climate change. One of my doctor friends, Dr. Beth Bowen, who's here, had mentioned at the European Baha'i Business Forum that we were just at in the Netherlands that you would last 3 minutes without air, so we have to clean it up, right? You'd last 3 days without water, and you'd last 3 weeks without food. So you can just remember those three. 3 is very important. And we want to make sure that we don't get to a state where we are limiting it to that. But in fact, a lot of people in the world are in that situation and are struggling in the way that we are. You know, I was at the Johannesburg Sustainable Development Forum, and I remember I was there with Diana, actually. We were co-representing, and it was a great opportunity. But the Baha'i community issued a statement that was very disturbing because it was just after 9/11. And the statement was religion and development, convergence and divergence. Well, you know, we were there, and I remember one person saying, well, it's nice that you've all come, but if you don't say anything, it won't make any difference that you're here. So I thought, well, that's interesting. But what this statement was, because I was just going to sort of be there and, you know, take it all in, and here I wasn't interested in making any presentations, but we were asked to present this statement. Well, the statement was about religion, and it was like the world had one nerve left and we were getting on it. That was, my personal feeling was, I don't want to talk about this at all, and I'm sure that nobody else does here, but we could just maybe slip it in, have people. And I remember presenting it to one government, and you know, when I raised my hand to say, because I thought of this guy who said you have to talk, you know, I didn't want to talk, but I had to say, have you tried to put religion and spirituality into the declaration that's going to come out of this? And they looked at me like, how did this guy get in here? And most impressively was the religious communities who thought, you're going to ruin it for all the rest of us. Like, why do you have to bring this up? They were acting actually quite a bit more secular than the secularists. So anyway, it was kind of difficult. And then they, of course, said, no, we cannot do that. And I said, well, why can't you do that? They said, because it's much too emotional, religion. I thought, well, here I am at the World Summit. Dirt is emotional. Water is emotional. Everything we're talking about is emotional. That can't be a reason not to do this. But I realized that what was really going on was the difficulty that people have and the arguments that perhaps will emerge, as if they don't happen in politics, when the subject of religion comes up. And I think it's interesting. When I was in Guyana, one time I was going and talking the faith to this Hindu man, and he said there was a preacher on the radio, Rabbi Washington, who was preaching against Islam and in favor of Christianity. And the Guyanese really didn't have this problem with religion because they really respected anyone talking about religion and welcomed it into their household. Anyway, he said this rabbi had said he went to India and he put his hand on someone and said, heal this man in the name of Muhammad, and he wasn't healed. And then he said he put his hand on the head of this man and said, heal this man in the name of Jesus, and he was healed. Now remember, he's a Hindu, and he said to me, what would a Baha'i say about that? Well, that's a difficult question. I didn't expect that where I was. But I thought for a moment. I said, I think the man was really sick and he had to call on 2 manifestations of God to heal him. So I think we have to try to become more inclusive in our thinking and less competitive, and be clear that it's only through working together and respecting this diversity that we have that will make this difference. One of the statements, one of the quotations that I think is apropos for our subject today is, what if we imagine that the concept of religion, or what we think religion is completely different than it is? What if everyone here imagines that they're a learner and they know nothing about religion? They actually don't know how to apply spiritual principle to complex problems. They may not even know what the spiritual principles are that need to be applied. What if we imagine that a civilization that is to be created will be different than anything that we've seen in the past? That will create at least a level of humility, which is what religion ultimately begins to bring to humankind. Because everything else God has, He has all the other virtues. He requests us to have humility. And if we're going to be a learning community or a community of encouragement, we cannot be one that thinks that it knows everything. What we might know is that God may have provided spiritual principles, but we need to apply those in a way that we can only do through consultation with respect and regard for each other. And that ultimately the moral capacities that we're going to need are going to be different than the ones that we created the world of the past in. I say to the students at the school, please don't do what my generation has done. Because if you do that, we'll be in the same place again, and it might even get worse. So we need to do something quite a bit different. If you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, that is the definition of insanity, right? So we don't want to engage our youth in insanity. We want to actually help them to realize that we're going to have to change profoundly what it is we're doing and the way in which we're doing it. The quotation here says, "That which was applicable to human needs during the early history of the race can neither meet nor satisfy the demands of this day. This period of newness and consummation. Man must now become imbued with new virtues and powers, new moral standards, new capacities. The gifts and blessings of the period of youth, although timely and sufficient during the adolescence of mankind, are now incapable of meeting the requirements of its maturity." And one of the things that we know about maturity is that when we mature, we conduct ourselves in a way that has due regard for the rights of others. I'm really sick of being in an oppressed secular environment. I find it very difficult to function there. I don't mind if they have their space, but I don't think they should take all the space, nor should they dominate the agenda. The idea of not having the spiritual nature of human beings understood or talked about is a profound deficit in education throughout the world at this point. It doesn't mean we have to become all, kind of airy-fairy and spiritual, whatever that might mean to various people. But it does mean that we have to recognize that there are latent spiritual capacities in people. There are latent moral capacities. They're not empty vessels. They have many things to offer. And we have to engage that along with scientific knowledge and secular information. But we must not predict that the secular facts that we have are the reality, because in fact they're only a reflection of the understanding of what it is to be human so far. In other words, in an acorn, somebody says you have an oak tree. Well, you actually don't have an oak tree. It's impossible to imagine that. But what you do know is if you put the oak tree in the right conditions, put the acorn in the right conditions, an oak tree will emerge because it attracts certain things, and in the right environment it becomes something profoundly different. In a way, you might say that an acorn represents our imagined reality, or our concept of what it is. Because we can imagine that, because it has that potential, it attracts to it form. And then that form actually takes place, and then that becomes a fact. So what I'm trying to say here is the facts as we know them right now are only there because of the reality we perceive so far. And we're going to have to go profoundly beyond what it is that we conceive humanity to be in order to get somewhere else. And I think when we look at, if we imagine, as was said earlier in the BIC presentation, that the world is as a body and the states are as organs or limbs and so on, we can't afford to ignore any one of those. In fact, to do so means that you will kill the entire body. We can't imagine that anyone is less important than someone else. We can't imagine that a baby dying in Africa is any less than if it died in my own house. And until we can feel that, then it will be difficult for us to have the moral will and drive the political will to be able to do to create the changes that we have to see. Let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot round which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. Its appeal is not to be merely identified with a reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men, nor does it aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations. Its implications are deeper, its claims greater than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance. Its message is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the states and nations as members of one human family. It does not constitute merely the enunciation of an ideal, but stands inseparably associated with an institution adequate to embody its truth, demonstrate its validity, and perpetuate its influence. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. So I think if we were to get one thing out of what it is we're trying to create, is to know that we don't know. To know that we don't know this civilization that we need to create in order to solve the problems that we have. And to know that we have to all work together in order to do this.